All right, we are live. Today we are going to be continuing our discussion of the Sira material, looking at how early Muslims kind of made up this biography of Muhammad. And today we're focusing in on how stories about Jesus slightly adapted them and then pretended that they were about Muhammad. Before we get started, let me just open us with a word of prayer, give people time to connect. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time together. We thank you for the technology that allows us to connect with fellow believers and unbelievers around the world. We thank you for the opportunity to reach into the Muslim world, so to speak, to get around the closed society and reach people. We ask that any Muslims today, watching today or later on the replay, approach the material with an open mind and an open heart, that they not simply dismiss everything we say as lies, but rather look into the materials that we're presenting for themselves and confirm what we say. We don't ask anyone believe us on our own word. We ask that they are motivated to look into this material for themselves and ultimately realize that Islam is a false religion and they need to be looking for something different. We ask that you be with us and guide our discussion, and that anything that we say that is useful is remembered, and anything that we say is useless or false is simply forgotten. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So to get us started, I have a little story to share about a recent post on my channel, and then I'll ask my guests if they have any opening thoughts as well. I'm joined today by Lloyd and from Io from the Third Apology. As usual, their channels are listed in the video description box, so be sure to check those out, subscribe to their channels. So let me just share my screen here. So this is kind of a little thing that happened yesterday on my channel. You'll see that these are comments inspired by Sheikh Ahmadidat, a regular on this channel. It's not really about him. The point of this is not to make fun of him or laugh at what he has to say. Rather, I have a very specific purpose for bringing this up. So he just left this generic comment first, that there's nothing funny about what is being said in the post I made, and then try to say something about the Bible. So, I just kind of said, give me one reason to believe in Allah. I've been searching for years and I haven't found anything credible. And then he said, make sure you have enough knowledge to defend it. I don't want you running away saying I have no knowledge of that, like your last attempt to defend Islam. And then he says, well, I do know what I'm talking about. Show me a video that you made that argues for Christianity, which is quite humorous, since I do a Bible study every single week. I don't know how he missed all those, but yeah. And then he says the same thing goes for David Wood. And, I offered to point out numerous videos David Wood has done on Christianity. And then he makes this amazing statement here that I admit I've never read the Bible to cover, but I'm grateful I'm not ignorant on the Bible like you are for the Quran. And then this sentence you see here, look, I memorized that verse, I didn't get it from any website, is actually an edit. He originally said, here's another verse, and he kind of misquoted the verse. He didn't know where it was. So it's very interesting that somehow he's never read the Bible, yet he didn't get this verse from any website, and yet somehow he knows about it. It's very, very interesting material, and also very interesting that he says that he's not ignorant about something he hasn't read. I'm not quite sure how that works out. So anyway, the conversation really didn't go much of anywhere until this fellow named Anthony Narana joined in, and he says, responding to Iyad saying that Allah never commands anything shameful. And they said, is it not shameful for Muhammad to lust after his son's wife and later on marry her, as the shameful Allah commanded in the revelation that followed, and merciful Allah outlawed adoption with another revelation? So inspired, he was basically ignoring my comments by this point. He had realized he wasn't getting anywhere, but then he sees this and he thinks he has an opportunity to join it in with his usual prepared answer. So he says that Zayed had planned to divorce his wife, and Allah decreed that the Prophet should marry her. In fact, when Zayed came to the Prophet saying he wanted a divorce, the Prophet said, "Keep your wife, fear Allah." And then he said there's a Quran verse about this, and then he quotes the Quran. I'm going to go ahead and read the Quran here because it's going to be relevant. And remember, O Muhammad, when you said to the one on whom Allah bestowed favor and you bestowed favor, keep your wife and fear Allah, while you concealed within yourself that which Allah is to disclose, and you feared the people, Allah has more right than you to fear him. So when Zayed had no longer any need of her, we married her to you in order that there not be upon the believers any discomfort concerning the wives of adopted sons when they no longer have need of them, and ever is the command of Allah. So, he says that Zayed came and said he wanted a divorce, and Muhammad said, "Don't do that." I said, "Yeah, but then what happened? Did Allah praise or condemn that?" Because he's trying to say this is a proof that Muhammad wasn't lusting after his wife, but in fact, Allah condemns Muhammad for saying this, because Allah had already revealed to Muhammad supposedly that he was going to marry the woman. So basically the outline here is exactly what Anthony had said, that Muhammad did something shameful, and then he said, no, keep your wife, because it was pretty obviously wrong. And then Allah comes back and corrects Muhammad and says, no, you need to marry her. So then I also asked him if he had ever encountered this situation in his entire life, where there was a group of people who were just wondering whether or not it was acceptable to marry their adopted son's ex-wife or not. I said, is this a massive social problem that requires all to break up marriages to demonstrate it's okay? And then he comes back and he says, well, you got a logical fallacy in your argument. This is just because it's a rare occurrence doesn't mean it's wrong, which is not remotely what I said. Nowhere does it say Allah broke up the marriage. Your reply is not even related to the topic. Okay, since you don't want to read the whole verse, I'll just take out the relevant part. So when Zayed had no longer any need of her, we married her to you. So then I explained that that's not what I meant. And that, I pointed out it was rare because it doesn't seem like something Allah needs to make this really dramatic example of. He could just command it if he needed to put it in his book for some reason. And then I said that, I highlighted Allah is to disclose what's happening. And then I explained the verse to him. And then I also said, tell me what that phrase "no longer have any need of her" means in classical Arabic, because it's really just a way of saying got divorced. It doesn't actually mean that he was tired of her or whatever. So, I'm directly going to the Quran, explaining what the Quran means, and we're just kind of going back and forth. He's comfortable enough in this situation because he can just play this game. What does the Quran mean? Well, I can say it means whatever I want. So then I started quoting the classical tafsir to him, and you'll see Al-Tabari up on the screen, and I'll just read a little bit of it. So he says that when the Prophet had seen her in her robes, he was enamored with her, and thus when Allah saw what was stirring in the Prophet's soul, he placed hatred in the heart of Zayed towards Zainab, and that he might depart from her. So exactly what I said, that Allah caused the marriage to break up, and then goes on and says about how Muhammad was wrong for trying to keep the marriage together when Allah had commanded otherwise. And then the quote from Al-Tabari ends with the second narration saying that when Muhammad was visiting the house, a wind blew at the curtain, and the Prophet saw Zainab in her room unclothed, and he admired her in his heart. When Zainab realized the Prophet desired her, she began to hate Zayed. So, kind of confirming that he was lusting after her. Well, surprisingly enough, I started with Al-Tabari, and then I was posting another tafsir, and then when I went to post a third one, I got an error message from YouTube saying the post you're trying to reply to no longer exists. So I took a screen capture of everything, and sure enough, Dita had deleted the whole thread. So this is the reason I brought this up, is because as long as you're debating the Quran with someone, they can play games. But as soon as I went to the tafsir, to the authoritative interpretation, he knew he was trapped and he couldn't get away with making up this excuse which directly contradicts the actual Quran anymore. And he was embarrassed and deleted the whole thread.
Wow.
So that was kind of a long way to introduce what we're talking about today and why we're doing these secondary sources. You know, we do get comments periodically from Muslims and from non-Muslims saying, you know, just go with the Quran. That's what's most important anyway. And as long as we're going exclusively to the Quran, we can look at it. We can use sound exegesis. We can say, you know, you're definitely wrong. And that's valid from our perspective. But as long as we're doing that from their perspective, we're not attacking what's actually authoritative to them, which is the interpretation of the imams and scholars. They know as long as it's our interpretation versus theirs, they can just say, well, that person's wrong. But then when we start quoting them actually authoritative sources, then they can't get away with that anymore. So that's why we go to these secondary sources. It's not because we think they're historical or they're super accurate or anything like that. It's because they have authority in Islam. They're the primary things that Muslims look at. So with that long introduction out of the way, I'll turn it over to Lloyd. I believe he has a couple words he wants to say, and then I'll ask Io for his opening thoughts.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be back. We're going to be studying more about Muhammad, the deity, the God Muhammad that Muslims actually worship. We're going to learn a lot about how he is a counterfeit Jesus, how they attempt to make him Jesus. In fact, Islam is the ultimate replacement theology. It wants to replace Christianity with Islam and replace Jesus with Muhammad, and they make Muhammad into a partner of Allah. And we will be going through this in detail. We'll be covering the Sira. I've read through something like 36 of these Sira, and these stories are consistent amongst all of them. So they're not a singular event. They occur across dozens of these biographies, these Gospels of Muhammad. And we'll also cover the Sharia where appropriate. You'll discover that these things are now part of Islamic law. They're actually part and parcel of the Sharia. And Muslims do not want us reading this. However, once we expose this, you will understand just what Islam actually teaches and what's been hidden from us for a long time. And why they focus on the Quran, because the Quran is so vague. And why they focus on Bukhari and Muslim, because there are actually many, many, many more hadith collections that are authoritative that they do not want us looking at. Ayo, up to you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you know, when Thaddeus first opened up the exchange, it was interesting, but I didn't really see what he was getting at first. But then when he brought up Al-Tabari, I was like, man, okay, there we go. I see how it's making it a lot harder for him to be able to squirm out of, the kind of vagueness that you usually see in the Quran, or the type of details that they'll leave out. So that, in my opinion, was a picture perfect example of why these secondary sources should be considered. Because as I was telling Lloyd and Thaddeus before the stream began, if this can really become something that's mainstream and that's a cliche among Christian apologists, it'll really help to do some damage to Islam as an ideology and to wake people up to the truth. And part of that is, as Lloyd said, is looking at the sources today surrounding how they deify Muhammad. And so I'm excited to see what he's going to present and to give my thoughts as well. And I hope that all of you will be able to, just as Thaddeus said in the prayer, look at it with an open mind.
Yeah, I want to say perhaps on that, maybe a controversial point, but the Quran is the secondary source. Mm-hmm. These other sources are the primary source. In many cases, they outrank and they are primary over the Quran. They violate the Quran, but what they say, speak about how David Wood always says how Muslims violate the Quran. You know, the Quran says the following, but Muslims have a completely contradictory view. Well, where do you find this contradictory view? The tafsir, the Sharia, and the Sira. So these views these traditions have replaced what is said in the Quran.
Interesting.
So, yeah, this is something Muslims also, they always told me, ask a scholar. Well, this is their major scholarly works from their top scholars. And this is what they say. Why should we believe no name Muslim 69 in the YouTube comments when we can read Tabari and Ibn Kathir and just prior to this, 20 minutes ago, they all became Shia scholars and can't be believed because Shia are not Muslim. So we don't have 1 point whatever billion Muslims. You got to minus the Shia, you got to minus the Ahmadis, you got to minus, I don't know, there's like 3 whole Muslims in the whole world now.
Wow. All apostates.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we hear that, when we post the authoritative scholars, generally the most respected scholars in Islamic history, we hear that they weren't real Muslims, that they're enemies of Islam who are just writing false things to contradict Islam. So, I think that a lot of YouTube Muslims think they're the only actual Muslim in the world or something.
Yeah. So yeah, shall we get started?
Let's do it.
We can start talking about the counterfeit Jesus, and I shall share my. You need to enable it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Thaddeus does not trust me. He thinks I'm going to start showing some my I don't know, my car collection pictures or whatever. I don't know.
All participants can.
Maybe I'm going to give like my holiday photos from 1970. And like, yeah. So shall we do that? Okay, my screen should be coming up in a moment.
See it.
Okay, I'm just going to move this over a little bit so I can see that a little better. Okay, so to pick up where we left off. So last week we spoke about how Muhammad was the light of Allah. He was the first being created by Allah. Muhammad is 170,000 plus years old. Muhammad's light adorned the throne of Allah. Muhammad was created out of the essence of Allah. All of the prophets from Noah, Moses, Abraham, Jesus were all created from the essence of Muhammad. He was worshipped for 100,000 years by all the spirits of mankind. Muhammad was worshipped. Make a note of that. Muhammad was worshipped by all the spirits of mankind, by all of the angels, by all of those who dwelled in heaven. And then he was born on earth, and Muhammad is the King Messiah. He is the one that Jesus prophesied. This is the belief of Islam. A lot of this you will not find in the Quran, and if you keep looking there, you're not going to find it. So yeah, let's continue. So what we have here, last week I ended around this point where Muhammad is the most like Jesus. Abu Huraira, Muhammad said, I am most akin to Jesus Christ among the whole of mankind. If Muhammad is superior to Jesus, why does he have to compare himself to Jesus? Why does he say, well, I'm the most like that amazing guy?
Yeah.
That is really odd, right? And again, Allah's messenger, that is Bukhari, that is Muslim, Hadith 5835, book 30. And again, we have Bukhari. Allah's messenger said, in this world and in the hereafter, I am the nearest of all the people to Jesus, the son of Mary. Why does he have to compare himself to Jesus and say he's the nearest? Shouldn't he be saying, well, Jesus is the nearest to me if Muhammad is superior to all prophets? Your thoughts on that before I go on?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, to me, it almost signifies to me some type of insecurity in which he's having all these great claims made about himself, whether through the scholars or personally, if he actually said these things. And yet, when interacting with the people of his day, he constantly felt the need to appeal to people like Jesus. And I feel like, although in terms of official labels, he's not going to say, oh, Jesus is superior to me. He subconsciously recognizes that there's something about him that would cause him to want to appeal to him. And that to me is huge, because when you can notice those kind of subtle nuances as to how people refer to others and how they talk about themselves, it usually signifies how much confidence that they have within their own mission and their own identity.
Right. So they constantly refer to the Bible to prove Muhammad. And of course, they say the Bible is false and corrupt, which is interesting. Now, notice, I want to reiterate, so I'll pick up from here.
But before you go on, Muhammad Amin, who I should probably just ban since he's previously banned, but we'll let him go
Seems like
for
a
now.
troll.
Oh, no,
he said that Muhammad didn't compare himself to Jesus. He meant he's the last of prophets. And he said that our interpretation is very funny. Well, you know, I would say that that interpretation is very funny, because if he meant he's chronologically nearest to Jesus of all people, what about all the people who lived 600 years between Jesus and Muhammad? I guess none of them were closer chronologically. I would say your interpretation is nonsensical.
But then he also misses the entire 2-hour show that we did 2 weeks ago, which where Muhammad lays out explicitly how he is the one that Jesus was revealing, you know, and so on, and that he is the real Jesus. So to believe in the inspired books of Allah means to believe in those books which Allah revealed to his messengers. But notice again, the obligation of belief applies to the original revelations that Allah sent to the Jews and the Christians, not the scriptures in the hands of non-Muslims, which are corrupt in their present form. This is the Sharia, Umdat al-Salik, U 3.4. So this has become Sharia law. This is the doctrine. So no matter what the Quran says, which contradicts this, this is now the opinion of the scholars. This has become Islamic law for all time. This ultimately contradicts, and therefore it makes the Quran in many cases a secondary source, since the Sharia is the final opinion, the final word, the primary source of Islam. So this does not contradict the final coming of Jesus, since he will not rule according to the Gospels, the Evangelists, the Gospels. Jesus will be a follower of our prophet. The faith of the Christians was that whoever adhered to the Gospels of Jesus, their faith was valid and acceptable until the coming of Muhammad. Those who did not follow Muhammad and give up the Sunnah of Jesus and the Gospels were lost. In other words, went to hell. No one's way of spiritual works are acceptable unless they conform to the sacred law of Muhammad, to the Sharia. This is from the most famous Sharia manual on earth. This is the most common, most quoted Sharia and most authoritative Sharia manual on earth. That's section W 4.5 in Umdat al-Salik. So now, Allah tells Muhammad he is only a man. Say, I am only a man like you, to whom has been revealed that your God is one God, that your Allah is one Allah. So Allah says that Muhammad must tell the people that I'm only a man, I'm just a warner, a plain warner, to whom has been revealed that there is no God but Allah. That is Quran 18:110. Now, the Quran also warns the Christians, O people of the scripture, do not exaggerate in your religion. Do not speak anything of Allah except for the truth. The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, was only a messenger, just like Muhammad is apparently only a messenger. But here, the weird contradiction is, and his word, which he conveyed unto Mary. So the word of Allah is apparently a separate portion of Allah. Is the Kalam, which he sent down into Mary, and a spirit from him. Interesting. Now, he argues that when Jesus descends for the second time, the Sharia of Muhammad will be revealed to him through the tongue of Gabriel. So the story is that when Jesus comes back at the end times, he will receive the Sharia of Muhammad through the tongue of Gabriel. Well, he's in heaven right now with the Father, because Jesus was apparently not killed. He was ascended into heaven according to the Quran. So he did not die. So why doesn't Allah just speak to him right now? So anyway, none of the prophets nor from the ulama came before and after will go out from the orbit of the Sharia. So all the prophets, everyone of knowledge, will follow the Sharia of Muhammad. That's Al-Sharani and Al-Mizan Al-Kubra. Now I'll finish this point and give you guys the floor again. So from Tafsir Ibn Abbas on Quran 3:33, when the Jews heard this, they said, we follow the religion of Adam. We are Muslims. And so Allah revealed the following. Allah preferred Adam with Islam and Noah with Islam, and the family of Abraham, the children of Abraham with Islam, and the family of Imran, Moses, and Aaron with Islam. So this is Tafsir Ibn Abbas speaking about Quran 3:33. Apparently every single descendant in the Bible was a Muslim. So now they speak here of the Jews. They blasphemed, they sinned in accusing Mary of fornication, because she obviously was with child, and this was Jesus that was born obviously through a miracle. But they speak of they accuse Mary of fornication. And they speak of the extremism of the Christians in considering Jesus a God. And for our excessiveness and remissness, we are going to hell. We must be punished. Umdat al-Salik P75.23. And shortly after this, we will start to look further into how Islam considers Muhammad a god. Any comments on what I've said so far, guys?
I'll let Io comment on the material, but then I have something from chat I would like to address, which is on topic, but not directly.
Yeah, I mean, again, we see on a much greater scale, even with the fact that they try to delineate all of the biblical descendants as Muslims, this kind of appeal, as you said, to somehow make Muhammad and Islam and Allah more credible because they're appealing to Christianity. And again, they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be able to say that they're superior to it and say, oh, Jesus is going to be, delivering Sharia when he comes back, and he's going to be working with Gabriel and bowing down to Muhammad and all these people. And yet they want to appeal to Jesus and these other figures as if they're the ones that give them their validity. So it seems like they're having a hard time making up their minds. Is Jesus superior or not? And if he is, then okay, I mean, he's superior. So then Islam obviously can't be true. But if he's not, then all this constant appeal really just isn't helping make your case that you stand in judgment over Christianity and Jesus.
Yeah, your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, so we have a comment from Inspired by Sheikh Ahmadida, and I thought that this was really appropriate because he says, Surah 3:84 says we make no distinction between messengers. And indeed, that's true.
You covered that last week in depth.
Yeah, the Quran does say that, which goes to our point that much of Islam contradicts what the Quran says. The Quran says over and over again that Muhammad is just a messenger, a mere warner. He has no prophecies to bring. And then he has no prophecies. He can't work any miracles. His only miracle is the Quran. And then we go to the Sira and we find all kinds of miracles that Muhammad supposedly worked.
Yeah, but not just that. The Quran, we are explicitly told we make no distinction between any of his messengers. And then Abu Huraira, I have been given superiority over the other prophets.
Mm-hmm.
I will be the chief of all the people on the day of resurrection. Even Allah says, go to Muhammad. And Allah will guide me to such praises and glorification as he has never guided anybody else. And every prophet used to be sent to his nation, but only I have been sent to all mankind. It goes on and on. We discussed this in detail. So if Dida would go back over last week's show, he will realize that he is ignorant of his own religion and always lying because his scholars have actually written books. If he can send us the book that he wrote that is authoritative and respected in the major Islamic institutions, I'd love to see it.
So just to finish that point before we move on, I said that the Sira contradicted that idea, which we just demonstrated that the Hadith contradict that idea. For example, the Shahada is a clear contradiction of that idea because it says Allah and his messenger Muhammad. It doesn't say Allah and his 172,000 messengers, which we all consider exactly equal. And common Muslims contradict this idea every single day, including D. himself. In that same thread that we looked at the beginning, he said that one of the reasons he believes in Islam, in fact, the main reason, is all the prophecies that Muhammad brought that have come true. Not that that's actually an accurate statement that Muhammad's prophecies came true, but again, it's a direct contradiction of what the Quran says. The Quran says over and over again, I can't predict the future. I'm just a man. I don't know what's going to happen. And then you go to the Sira and it has all these so-called prophecies.
We're going to get into that now as well. Yeah. I mean, Muhammad's light adorned the throne of God. This is how important Muhammad is. So, yeah, we covered that in depth in the previous show. So we're dealing with someone who's ignorant of his own scriptures. In fact, if you read the Sharia, and I'll go back to this, chapter V 2.0, his messenger in the Sharia, it says here that belief in Allah alone is not enough to be a Muslim. Allah has favored Muhammad above all other prophets and made him the highest of mankind. just a regular warner, no different to anybody, above everyone, the highest of mankind that has ever lived, normal like everyone else. Rejecting, so Allah rejects anyone who attests to the divine oneness, the Tawhid, by saying there's no God but Allah, unless they also attest to the Prophet by saying Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. This is in the Sharia. This is permanent Islamic law for all time. Remember, Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by Muhammad, apparently.
That's a great point, Lloyd.
Iyad did have a response, which is nothing more than word games. He said, Lloyd, read the whole title. It says it doesn't say he was superior. It says he was superior in six aspects, which apparently means the exact same thing as there's no distinction whatsoever, that he's exactly equal, because they explicitly said these 6 ways. He didn't mean he's superior. He meant he's superior in those 6 ways, that he's exactly the same as every other prophet. And then when you're reading the Sharia law, his response was a laughy emoji. Well, we agree. It's a
crying emoji. He's crying. He's emotional coming out.
It's a huge intellectual price tag to have to try to, distort the sources to make them fit with what you want to believe to be true versus what they just plainly say.
Yeah. So remember, they tell us do not exaggerate, right? And yet, let's move forward. So now we go into one of the Sira, right? So you saw me in a group of prophets, and there was Moses standing praying. There was a man thin and curly haired, as though he were one of the men of Kanwa. This was Jesus, who was standing and praying. And the one who most resembles him is Urwa bin Masud, whatever. There was also Abraham standing praying, and the one who resembles him most is your companion, meaning himself. So Muhammad looks the most like Abraham. Then the time for prayers came, and I acted as he's in heaven now. Remember, he goes on his night journey?
Yeah.
So then the time for prayers came, and I acted as imam for all of the prophets in heaven. When he had finished prayers, a voice said to me, "Oh, Muhammad, this is Malik, the chamberlain of hell, so greet him." And then, of course, Satan greets him. And, of course, Jesus had a son's relationship with his father. Now, Arthur Jeffrey tells us Jesus had a son's relationship with his father. So this story is intended to show how Muhammad had an equally intimate acquaintance with his Lord. There are multiple versions of the story, including, and this one is from As-Suyuti, right? This is in 1317. So As-Suyuti. So yes, this is one of Islam's major scholars. And this story is repeated in various other Sira as well. So Muhammad leads the prayers, and Jesus, Abraham, Moses, and everyone prays behind him.
Wow. That's very interesting.
Now, let's continue. So anything from you, Thaddeus?
Nope. I just gave a warning to Yahya. He's going on about his fantasies about how he's a great debater or whatever. And I said, no, no one cares about your fantasies about your debate skills. Either get on topic or get lost. So that should be a warning to anyone else listening as well. Please keep the chat on topic.
Yeah.
Well, we know that we read earlier in the previous show that anyone who lies about Muhammad goes straight to hell. That was made very, very clear in the Quran, in the Hadith, and so on. Anyone who lies about Muhammad goes to hell. So we know Aisha is going to hell. We know that Tabari is going to hell. We know that Ibn Kathir is going to hell. We know Al-Ghazali is, in fact, every single Islamic scholar is going to hell. So we can be confident of that. I said to Aisha, "O mother, did the Prophet Muhammad see his Lord?" Aisha said, "What you have said makes my hair stand on end. I know that if somebody tells you one of the following 3 things, he is a liar. Whoever tells you that Muhammad saw his Lord is a liar." So Muhammad was up in heaven chatting with God. So As-Suyuti was lying, apparently.
Which means
he's in hell, according to Aisha. And remember, the superiority of Aisha over other women is as, and Muhammad compares it to food, is as tarid compared to McDonald's hamburger. So then she goes on. Then Aisha recited the verse, "No vision can grasp him, but his grasp is over all vision." So no one can see God. But Muhammad did, apparently. He is the most courteous, well acquainted with all things. It is not fitting for a human being that Allah should speak to him except by inspiration or from behind a veil. I believe Muhammad got on a horse, rode to heaven, met Jesus, Abraham, Peter, Paul. They all prayed behind him. Aisha further said, whoever tells you that the prophet knows what is going to happen tomorrow is a liar. Muhammad could make no prophecies because he did not know what is happening tomorrow. But I believe Didat has told us multiple times Muhammad made many prophecies, Thaddeus?
Yes, that's correct. According to Aisha, inspired by Ahmadiyya, is a liar who is going straight to hell.
To hell. And she further said, she then recited, no soul can know what it will earn tomorrow. That is Quran 31:34. She then added, whoever tells you that he concealed some of Allah's orders is a liar. And then she said, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But the prophet saw Gabriel in his true form twice. So he never saw God, apparently. And that is Bukhari. Now, either Didat's lying, or Bukhari's lying, or Aisha's lying, or they're all just in hell right now.
Yeah. Something's amiss.
So now, we'll come back to that in a minute. We'll come back to that. But we know there's multiple claims about Muhammad's prophecies. We know that there are multiple claims about Muhammad went to heaven on his little horse or whatever the thing was, little donkey, who knows. But anyone who tells you that Muhammad saw God is a liar, right? Whoever tells you that Muhammad knows what is going to happen tomorrow is a liar. Now, this is from the Sharia, section R7.1, giving directions to someone who wants to do wrong. Now, how we define wrong in Christian civilization versus Islam are two separate things entirely. It is not permissible to give directions and the like to someone who is intending to perpetrate a sin because it is helping another to commit disobedience. Now, for instance, speaking ill of Muhammad, speaking ill of the Quran, and speaking ill of Islam is a sin. For instance, showing the way to a policeman when they're going to commit injustice and corruption. Right? Corruption could be when the French police want to find the men who committed the Bataclan massacre, and the French say, the Islamic immigrants say, we don't know where they are.
Yeah.
And they hide them there for 2 months in Molenbeek, because that would be showing the way to policemen who are going to commit injustice and corruption against these fine jihadis. And here's the critical one. Giving directions to wrongdoers includes teaching sacred law to those learning it in bad faith, i.e. who do not want the knowledge to apply it in their lives, in other words, to convert to Islam, but for some unworthy purpose, like what we are doing, to criticize it. It is illegal for Muslims to teach Sharia. That is why they can never, ever discuss Sharia with us.
Yeah, it's a good point. Wow.
Yeah, and we see that in practice. I've asked a number of Muslims to quote Sharia. Lloyd does it constantly. He's probably asked 100 different Muslims on my channel alone to quote Sharia, and I do not recall anyone ever doing it. And it's probably because they know that they're not allowed to.
Yes, they are well aware of it, I would think. Now, notice, I mentioned this last week. This is in the Sharia, Reliance K 1.2e. If a Quran is purchased for someone, it's obligatory that the person be Muslim. The same is true of books of hadith and books containing words and deeds of the Muslims. Quran in this context means any work that contains some of the Quran, even a slight amount. We are not to be sold Islamic books. Does this make sense now? This is specified and made explicit in the Sharia. What we are doing is illegal because we are not looking to convert. And they must prevent us. Now, you asked me a question, Ayo, about the way this I think 36:108 or whatever it was David's been talking about. They must not disparage Christianity or other religions so that we do not disparage their religion and Allah. Well, we did this on a show with Thaddeus and Sonia some time ago, and I can do it another time again. However, the Sharia teaches explicitly they are to be harsh, up to and including being violent, to prevent us from disparaging Islam. They are to use harsh language. They are to use foul language. It is explicitly stated in the Sharia. They are to be aggressive.
So again, with the contradictions, I mean, it looks bad either way, but even having a contradiction within their own two ends of the spectrum just shows the inconsistencies between the Quran, the Hadith, and then the Sharia, the Tafsir, etc.
Right. So does this make sense, everyone, this law here?
Yeah, yeah, makes a lot of
Right.
sense. Because I
No,
mean, on one hand, they don't want to. I mean, they may know it contradicts, and they don't want to showcase that to the common person, to the non-Muslim. But on the other hand, too, it is something that they want to be able to coddle and not get out to the masses. So I'm glad
correct.
we're at least looking at it.
So now, understand when they speak of corruption in Islam, corruption is fitna, which is actually simply temptation. And in this case, it is temptation away from Islam. So when they say corruption, that is just temptation away from Islam. Because when you look in the Sharia for fitna, it just says see temptation. Now, I want to go to another portion. Islam does not allow lying except when you need to lie, and it allows lying. And there are multiple kinds of lying. There are many. There's at least 7 that I know of, probably 9, maybe 11, possibly more. But let's talk about permissible lying in the Sharia, right? And this section was written by Al-Ghazali, who is regarded as the #1 prime Muslim scholar after Muhammad himself. In section R8.2, he says, Muhammad said, he who settles disagreements between people to bring about peace or says something commendable is not a liar. So if you can keep the peace, you're not lying. If you lied to keep the peace, right? So this much is related by both Bukhari and Muslim, with Muslim's version recording that Kulthum said, I did not hear him permit untruth in anything people say, except for war. And remember, Islam is at war with the West right now. Settling disagreements while we disagree so I can lie to you. When have you ever agreed with a Muslim online? Ever? Pick a time. And a man talking with his wife or she with him. So in other words, you shouldn't lie, except go ahead. And you can smooth over differences. You see, if a lie would smooth over differences, then, well, we all worship the same God. We love Jesus. Not the same Jesus, of course, but we love God. We worship the same God. No, we don't.
It's insane too, because I mean, I'm focusing on settling disagreements. I mean, let's say I murder someone and then someone suspects me of it, and then they say, hey, did you murder them? And I disagree. I mean, then can I lie? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
So now notice Ghazali goes on. This is an explicit statement that lying is sometimes permissible for a given interest. Right? Scholars have established criteria of what types of lying are lawful. It is lawful to lie in Islam. It is lawful. The 10 Commandments, let's see, thou shalt not lie. I recall that. Is that in the 10 Commandments?
It is.
Yeah, there's no asterisk by that with a little fine print saying, oh, you can do that if, so.
Well, the best analysis is by Ghazali, who says, speaking is a means to achieve objectives. If a praiseworthy aim is attainable through both telling the truth and lying, it is unlawful to lie because there is no need for it. However, when it is possible to achieve such an aim by lying, but not by telling the truth, it is permissible to lie if attaining the goal is permissible. Now, let me pause and qualify this. The term permissible in the Sharia, in Islam, is a legal term. It has a very specific legal meaning. We covered that in a different show with Thaddeus in the past on hiyal, which is the ultimate basis. Taqiyya is a minor, forget taqiyya, it's a misdirection. Hiyal is the ultimate basis of deception in Islam. So in other words, if the goal is permissible, right? So that's a legal term. However, spreading Islam is compulsory for Muslims. It is permissible to lie if you are advancing the cause of Islam. So it is always permissible to lie. So when the purpose of lying is to circumvent someone who is preventing one from doing something permissible, for instance, we are trying to prevent these lying Muslims from lying to us and spreading Islam. So therefore, it is permissible for them to lie to circumvent us. And if the goal is obligatory, as in spreading Islam is obligatory, therefore it is obligatory to lie if the goal is obligatory.
Wow. Seems like a lot of circular reasoning almost too, where it's like, if you want, you can just create a scenario where it doesn't even matter. The guidelines all seem like red tape, because at the end of the day, the things they allow for make it to where you might as well just be able to say lie whenever you want. But what do I know?
So when is it not permissible to spread Islam? When is it not permissible to make
Exactly.
Islam superior? When is it not permissible to push the Sharia, to make people come to Islam? When?
Mhm.
There is no time.
So Admin asked a somewhat relevant question. He says, why are you wasting time talking about lying? That's not the subject at hand. Well, it kind of is the subject at hand, because we're going to see a bunch of lies made up about Muhammad. And this is why those lies are permissible, because it helps spread Islam. So thanks for allowing us to make that connection.
Yeah. So yeah, this is laid out in black and white explicitly. So this hadith that was mentioned up here, this is how the scholars view it. And I'm sure there's a book on this. I just haven't bothered to look yet. So now let's go back to Aisha and all that. And so no one can leave paradise. No fatigue will touch them therein, nor from it will they ever be removed. So the scholars believe that no one can ever leave paradise once they go to paradise. Of course, this leads to a contradiction, as Muhammad went to paradise. So how could he ever leave from there?
Mhm.
So that is actually a legitimate issue that has been raised.
Yeah.
Right. So then let's look at Ibn Kathir on the night journey and other miracles. There's a tafsir, and it's lengthy. I'll skip that. But let's talk about Muhammad saw Jesus. Right. It is narrated. So I saw near the Kaaba a man of fair complexion with straight hair, placing his hands on two persons. Water was flowing from his head, or it was trickling from his head. I asked, who is he? They said, he is Jesus, son of Mary. Right. And behind him I saw a man with red complexion, and this was Satan. So they speak of Jesus had water, the waters of life coming from him, right? He saw Jesus. Muhammad says again in Bukhari, I saw Jesus, who was of average height with a red face, as if he had just come out of a bathroom. And I resemble Prophet Abraham more than any of his offspring does. So Muhammad looks more like Abraham than any of his children.
Mm.
So then the messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, was carried in body from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the distant mosque in Jerusalem on a horse called Al-Burak in the company of Gabriel. Blah, 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 blah. The prophet, it was then, the gate was opened. He saw Adam, the progenitor of mankind. Adam welcomed him and expressed his faith in Muhammad's prophethood. He then saw the souls of the martyrs on his right and those of the wretched on his left. That is the sealed nectar by Saifur Rahman al-Mubarak Puri, called also known as Ar-Rahik al-Maktoum. So Muhammad went to heaven bodily.
Mhm.
He physically was transported to paradise, where he met God, don't forget, and all the prophets, prayed behind him. One of Abu Bakr's family told me that Aisha, the prophet's wife, used to say the apostle's body remained where it was, but God removed his spirit by night. And of course, that is Ibn Ishaq in the Sirat Rasul Allah, right? And of course, now we can go to this book, if we go to page 91 to 94 of the book, Famous But Unauthentic Stories, okay, they basically call Aisha and Ibn Ishaq a liar, right?
Because they try to argue that it was bodily as opposed to...
Yes, and
Okay.
therefore, Aisha was lying. Now remember, anyone who lies about Muhammad goes to hell.
Yeah.
So now Ibn Ishaq and Aisha are in hell for lying about Muhammad. Now this contradiction starts, okay? So now this, of course, was written well after Aisha,
Hmm.
right? So now Jesus, of course, was found in the second heaven, Moses in the sixth, and Muhammad went all the way to the seventh heaven. He went to the management floor. So the prophet observed that he met Jesus in the second heaven. Jesus only got to the second heaven. Yahya was in the third heaven. That's John. Yusuf in the third. Idris in the fourth. Harun in the fifth. We then traveled to reach the sixth heaven and came to Moses. Moses was in the sixth. But guess who goes all the way to the management floor? Good old Mo. And that's Muslim, book 1, Hadith 314. There's certainly been for you in the Messenger of Allah an excellent pattern for anyone, okay, going on. So Muhammad then tells us how Jesus was deceived by a thief, how Jesus was a complete idiot. Abu Hurairah reported from the Messenger, Allah's Messenger said, Jesus, son of Mary, saw a person committing theft. Jesus said to him, you committed theft. The thief said, nay, by him besides whom there is no God, I have not committed theft. Jesus said, I affirm my faith in Allah. It is my own self that deceived me.
So again, wants to appeal to Jesus to solidify his own status, but then is willing to vilify him for the sake of tearing him down and again trying to make him superior. You can't pick a side, and either way, it doesn't look good for him.
He insults Jesus.
Yeah, he insults his omniscience. He insults his intelligence. I mean, just even as a human, it's insane. But even more so as God incarnate.
Yep. So now, of course, Jesus will destroy the church and bring lots of money to the Muslims. Allah's messenger said, the hour will not be established until Jesus descends amongst you as a just ruler. He will break the cross. He will kill the pigs, because when you're Muslim, no one will eat pig anymore, right? Yummy, good old bacon. I'm going to miss that bacon. And abolish the jizya. Why? Because no one will be dhimmis anymore. Everyone will be Muslims. Money will be in abundance. That is Bukhari, book 43, volume 3, hadith 656. Afterwards, the Christians will be called upon it, and it will be said to them, who do you used to worship? They will say, we used to worship Jesus, the Son of Allah. It will be said to them, you are liars, for Allah has never taken anyone as a wife or a son. That's Bukhari. Your thoughts, guys?
Thaddeus, did you want to?
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of funny that he's going to kill the pigs, because I think you usually kill a pig in order to eat it. I don't know. So if no one's going to eat any more pigs, why do they have to be killed? It's not like he's going to come and kill all the spiders and all the eels and all the other foods that people aren't eating. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, my thing is just, again, you see within these sources how they just completely misunderstand the relationship of, God the Father with God the Son. It's not a sexual thing in which, the Father literally births Jesus through some type of sexual action. I mean, it's complete blasphemy to even say that, and yet it's constantly propagated as if this is what Christians hold to, when obviously in reality it's not. The relationship. Go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, Ibrahim Javed just said in the comment, you need serious help, right? Go pray to your three gods, and remember, go sleep with your mother and stepsister as you guys do best.
Oh my goodness.
This is not an aberration. Remember, Thaddeus, remember that episode where we spoke about how they needed to escalate the violence? And the first steps are to use abusive language to stop people. The Sharia instructs them to utilize abusive language. It is Sharia law. They are simply following the rules of the Sharia. This is normal behavior in Islam. It is absolutely normal. They are instructed to. And we can cover that we can repeat that in another show. Any final thoughts before I go on?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely insane that this is how argument is done in Islam. You come in and you insult people, and you think you've made a great point by saying, oh, you guys sleep with your mother, as if that's a real thing that Christians do. It's just nonsense.
Well,
I'm looking at the chat. It's just ridiculous, the comments here. I mean, not all of them, some of them are cool, but the Muslims here who are they get mad at us talking about these sources, and you see what they say.
Well, notice they're not speaking about these sources, right? They won't. And remember the previous show we spoke about how Ibn Qayyim said Christians will go to church and literally take a pee in their pants on the bench while in church, while having a conversation with the guy next to them, with pee dripping down their legs. This was his view as a major scholar of Islam. And this is where they get their views of Christians and Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, if the scholars are going to say stuff like that, the Christians just wet themselves while they're in church, then it's hardly surprising that the YouTube commenters make similar things. It's incredibly sad, but I've come to realize that a large percentage of Muslims are taught to hate Christians as the worst of all creatures. Exactly what the Quran says.
Lower than pigs, so maybe he's going to kill us when he comes back. Who knows?
I guess.
So
taught this stuff from birth, and then they're totally incapable of having a reasonable conversation, because in their mind we are subhuman, basically. Well,
right.
Sub pig even.
Yeah. So it goes on. He says, of course, Muhammad says that Jesus Christ will pronounce talbiyah for Hajj or for Umrah or for both simultaneously. So in other words, Jesus would, of course, become a Muslim and go on Hajj, right? That's in Sahih Muslim, book 7, hadith 2877. Now, notice they also say, none spoke in, the Prophet said, none spoke in the cradle, but only 3 persons. And one of those people is Jesus, who spoke as a baby in the cradle. This only comes from Gnostic heretical sources. It is not from any legitimate Christian source. These sources were considered heretical 2,000 years ago. Muhammad somehow didn't know this. Right.
Well,
So this is a very long story. I'll skip a lot of it. Yes.
Yeah, just to correct you there, though, they weren't considered heretical 2,000 years ago because they hadn't been written yet. They weren't written to the 4th century or so. And Muhammad thought they were legitimate 1st century sources.
Yeah, well, okay, fine. Thank you for clarifying. But yes, yeah, those were never considered by no church considers them legitimate, right? So the child said the man was a tyrant, and I said, "Oh Allah, don't make me like him." And they were saying about the girl, "You committed fornication," whereas in fact she had not committed that, and they were saying you have committed theft, whereas she had not committed theft. And so this is a really long story. Go look it up. Tell you what, so I'm not going to get into it. It's in the Riyad as-Salihin. It's from Al-Bukhari and Muslim, book 1, hadith 259. So it's just a really crazy story about Muhammad and Jesus. And yeah, anyway, moving on. I'll skip that. So now, this is a word from Ahmed Deedat, the original Ahmed Deedat, not the brain dead guy that comes in the comments. So the Quran lays bare the true position of Christ in a single verse. He was the son of woman, Mary, and therefore a man. A messenger, a man with a mission from God, and therefore entitled to honor. A word bestowed on Mary, for he was created by Allah's word be, and he was. Wonder where they stole that. And he was a spirit proceeding from Allah, but he was not Allah. His life and mission were more limited than in the case of some other messengers. His life and meaning was more limited than others, but we must pay honor to him as a prophet. The doctrines of Trinity, equality with God and the sons, are repudiated as blasphemies in Islam, but we worship the same God. Allah is independent of all needs and has no need of his son to manage his affairs, but he can't enter the world and needs Muhammad to manage his affairs. Because Satan can enter Allah's creation, but Allah can't enter his own creation because, they always ask, can God lift a stone? Can God create a stone he can't lift? Well, that's a logical fallacy, but Allah definitely can't enter the world he created.
Yeah. That's actually, I just comment. I said, I was just saying that somewhere. I think it was in like one of my latest videos where I was talking about how, if he creates this world, but it's a closed system in which he himself can't even enter it, then, I mean, does that do something to take away from his omnipotence? I mean, is it just a matter of physically not, by ability not being able to, or just unwillingness because he sees himself as so holy?
You see, well, okay, so I'll put this stuff very bluntly. I have not spent enough time reading these particular sources, but the Sharia and the rest of the Sharia manuals make it explicit. Islam is a Gnostic religion. It is a mishmash of all the Gnostic beliefs, along with Judaism, Talmudic Judaism, and heretical Christian sources. Islam states, if you read the Sharia, it states Islam is a Gnostic religion. So in the gnosis, the flesh, the real world, is dirty, and what is pure and clean is the spirit. And Allah is pure spirit. He would never dirty himself to come into the world and get filth on him. He would never be. That's why they make a big deal of Jesus being born to a woman in between pee and poop. Those things. See, so this is look. I mean, I can show some of that at another time, but there's at least 30 or 40 references to Islam being Gnostic, and the Muslim scholars being Gnostics. Even in the Umdat al-Salik, you'll find plenty of it. And in fact, if you read one of Al-Ghazali's manuals, he says that the top scholars of Islam are the perfect Illuminati. Wow. And you heard that correct. Ghazali states that the top scholars of Islam are the perfect Illuminati. That is in the Mishkat al-Anwar, right? But that's for another day. So this is the belief that they are pushing. Now notice he says the Gospel of John, whoever wrote it, has put a great deal of Alexandrian Gnostic mysticism around the doctrine of the word. However, this mysticism, this Gnostic mysticism is in Islam. It is not part of Christianity. It is recognized for centuries as Gnosticism and false. So, your thoughts?
So, it's insane because, again, shows their lack of understanding surrounding the issues and the beliefs of Christians. And to kind of come off of what you said there about the Gnosticism and Allah not entering into his creation. So I guess whereas Muslims will see it that way, Christians see it as they don't see matter as being inherently evil. And even more so, they see God as being able to enter into creation and still retain his nature. Because I feel like that's like a lot of like what the dilemma that Muslims have. They think that God can't still be God and become a human or have those two simultaneous natures. Whereas in Christianity, we see that as completely possible.
Well, think
in
the past, right? In the past, if you go back to the Old Testament, the Jews had to enter into the Holy of Holies after several days of purification and fasting. And then they were pure enough to enter into the Holy of Holies, because if they were not pure enough, if they were not ritually pure, they would be destroyed. They'd be burned in God's presence. But remember, I think it's Daniel has a dream. There's a vision that Daniel has where he goes to heaven, and the angel proceeds from God with a hot coal, and touches it to his lips.
Yes.
This is a foreshadowing of God realizes it's hard for people to enter into heaven, into a pure state. And therefore the priest would intercede, but he wants everyone to receive grace. So he realizes he needs to find a way to send his grace into the world rather than have people enter in and have a gatekeeper, let's say a priest, right? So therefore, this hot coal, which then transfers grace to Daniel, but also removes the sin from Daniel, that's a foreshadowing of Jesus, who comes into the world and takes our sin and gives us grace. Does that make sense, Thaddeus?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, does it make sense as you explained it? Yes. Does it make sense as a coherent religion? No. The Islamic concept, I mean.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So moving on, unless you guys want to discuss a point, I mean, probably we're not going to...
Well, actually, before you move on, I did want to very briefly touch on, it was like a slide or two back, but you don't need to go backwards. Just that the Quran calls Jesus the Word, and it calls him Spirit. It's interesting that the Quran borrows these terms, doesn't seem to know what they mean. We see this a lot, that it borrows Christian terms and Christian stories, and it tries to change the theology, but because the author doesn't really understand what he's doing, it ends up not. So if you read the Quran, it ends up saying that Jesus is the Word of God and that he's a spirit from God, but he's not God. I should say, but there's a distinction between God and his Word and God and his Spirit. And that sounds exactly like the Trinity to me.
My question when I heard that was, well, okay, if it's a spirit that's from God, meaning it's part of himself, then how can it be created? How is it not by nature then eternal and co-eternal with it?
The spirit of God is Gabriel in Islam. That's how they get around that one.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah, well, so now apparently Jesus is an angel Gabriel made flesh, still not just a man.
Gabriel's son.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? They're just all over the place.
So is he giving Muhammad the revelations then, since he's Gabriel?
I don't know. Like I said, it's all over the place. You have a pretty clear explanation of how this came to be, that they took Christian scriptures and used the terms and tried to create something different, but didn't completely edit out all the theology. Pretty straightforward, coherent answer. Islamic answer, it's Gabriel, and it's not Allah, and it is Allah, and it's not Gabriel, and he's just a man, and he's a prophet, and he doesn't create life. He does that by Allah's permission. And
don't forget the Ruh, which is the spirit, right? The Holy Spirit in Islamic terms is Gabriel. However, don't forget, when they speak of the Ruh, if you look at the Pentecost event, there they say that the spirit that will be sent down is Muhammad. So pick one. Mo, Gabe. The theology makes
confused.
So are you guys learning? So I can obviously speak directly to the two of you, but are you learning a completely new view of Muhammad within Islam from the scholarly view that we are never told about?
Yeah, it's really not something that we hear in YouTube comments. We see the contradiction that they say he's just a messenger, and then when we ask, well, why do you believe him? And they say, because he had lots of prophecies and miracles. We see that contradiction, but we don't get this kind of deification in the comments.
They need to start condemning their scholars for lying. So now the Sira of Muhammad, the meaning of this word. So throughout history, the world has never witnessed an ideal character like that of Prophet Muhammad, who, and we will go through it. I've got probably like 27 different hadith from Bukhari and Muslim where Muhammad comes on his own clothes. Now, I understand that's a little hard to take, but imagine Jesus were to do that in the Gospels. Don't you think the Muslims would be all over us, claiming Jesus was disgusting?
Yeah, they would.
But now, so this is the ideal character like that of Prophet Muhammad. The fact is maintained in the glorious Quran, right? You have blah, 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 blah. So the phrase Sirat Rasulullah or the Sira al-Nabawiyah refers to the study of the life of Muhammad, right? However, short version, the plural form, siyar, could also refer to the rules of war and dealing with non-Muslims. So the Sira of Muhammad is literally, originally about the wars of Muhammad, the example of Muhammad in war and how he dealt with non-Muslims. That is the original meaning. So the gospel would be, what is the meaning of gospel? What is the literal translation of that? The good news, right?
Good news, yeah.
Whereas Sira means war and how to politically subjugate non-Muslims.
That should tell you a whole lot already.
So literally stories of military expeditions. So the Sira contains Muhammad's political and military actions. Now, what's interesting is, right, part of the Sira were inspired by or expand on events mentioned in the Quran, right? And they provide background information for events mentioned in certain verses. This elaboration was developed to give the Quran a backstory. However, it doesn't independently confirm the Quran, right? So in early Islam, there was an inclination to exaggerate and fantasize, and there was a reliance on Israeliyat. In other words, the sources of the Jews, right? Thus, they were banned from preaching in mosques. So at some point, the Sira became banned. They weren't allowed to preach them in mosques. In later periods, works of Sira became more prominent, right? So then there's a discussion about Patricia Krona, and they speak of embellishment. Now, in Hadith studies, Israeliyat, or of the Israelites, are narratives assumed to be foreign imports, right? So they develop from Jewish sources, and they also derive from other religions like Christianity or Zoroastrianism. And they appear frequently in the Quranic commentaries, in the Sufi narratives, and in various other compilations, right? So, of course, they've stolen from the Bible, the Quran, and, of course, the Talmudic sources and so on. Yeah, and fables, they've stolen from Jewish fables. So that's a little bit, yeah.
Before you go on, I want to comment on that, this statement is exactly right, that the Quran will have some vague story. It'll, say, remember such and such. There'll be some details that don't make a lot of sense. Then you go to the tafsir, they seem to know what the story's about. They add all these other details, and surprise, surprise, those are the exact details that are found in the source texts of the Quran, these Jewish stories that were already in circulation when the Quran was composed. The tafsirs know about them. Presumably the original audience knew about them. And somehow they are Allah's eternal words, even though they are the stories of Jews, often stories that they didn't themselves consider to be history. They considered them to be allegorical tales that they had made up.
It's just a mess. It's just a mess at this point, man. I mean, the process in which it all comes about alone should be enough to raise any red flags with any honest person.
Understood. So yeah, look, obviously this is an exploration. Now look, we're probably going to have to, I don't know if you guys have the time in the future, but this is probably like 4 or 5 shows to complete all of this, right? But anyway, so of course, you know that Muhammad was born under a star, right? As we know, I heard a Jew calling out at the top of his lungs from the top of a fort, "O company of Jews," right? "Tonight has risen a star under which Muhammad, is to be born," right? And this is what was said to Amina when she conceived the apostle. A voice said to her, "You are pregnant with the Lord of this people." As she was pregnant with him, she saw a light come forth from her by which she could see the castles of Busra in Syria. Does that sound familiar?
Oh yeah, very familiar. I'm getting a little deja vu.
And sometimes I get vuja day, the feeling like I've never been here before. However, I want you to make note of this device because I think this thing was around long before the 1930s. I suspect this was around in the 7th century.
Oh,
Because this here, if we have a close look, the distance we're looking at, if you drive it, is 1,601 kilometers, all the
Wow.
way from Mecca down here to Busra in Syria here,
Mhm.
right? And a light, now we've just given you one example. We discussed like 5 or 6 additional ones in the previous show. So if guys like Dita will go to the previous episode, they'll discover multiple times this thing is referenced. So when Muhammad was born, when she was pregnant with Muhammad's mother Amina, a light shone from her vajayjay. In a straight line, it is 1,300 kilometers. I'm assuming she was outdoors on a mountaintop at the time, because this light lit up the castles in Busra, Syria, 1,300 kilometers away. If you guys can please give me, Dida, if you guys can give me the wattage of that light that was used to shine 1,300 kilometers from Amina's vajayjay, please. Love to know. This is basically what we are looking at here. You can see this is what happened on that night. Okay. And apparently the earth was lit up from east to west. It's north to south, but whatever. And so, 1,300 kilometers. And here we go. This device was seen all the way out here in Syria. That's quite impressive. That's what happened with the light of Muhammad shone out of his mother's. Yeah, impressive. He told how when she was pregnant with him, a light went out from her which illuminated the castles of Busra and Syria. She bore him with the least difficulty imaginable. When she bore him, he put his hands on the ground, lifting his head towards the heaven. Doing yoga, no doubt.
Yeah, I was like, what? Oh my goodness.
There we go. And Muhammad then said, I am what Abraham, my father, prayed for, and I am the good news of my brother Jesus.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's like directly from John chapter 8, when Jesus says how Abraham had longed to see his day. And so he's basically putting himself on that same pedestal, but then also trying to step over Jesus in the process.
Yes.
Before we move on from the light, Muhammad Amin had the typical brilliant Muslim response that is an unauthentic hadith there that you got. So there are 2 options basically. One, either it's authentic and you got a really embarrassing story, or it's false and Muslims are making up false stories about Muhammad, yet you trust them for everything else in your religion. So you're kind of
Salvation.
damned if you do, damned if you don't. But why don't you tell us the source of this story, Lloyd?
Last week, the previous show, I referenced at least half a dozen of these Sira. I've got 39 of them on my hard drive now, and I can easily find another dozen. I know there's another 5 that I didn't bother to download. I can only read so many of these stupid books, right? So all of them contain some semblance of this story. This thing appears at least 3 times in Ibn Ishaq. It's repeated multiple times. Ibn Kathir talks about it. Ibn Abbas talks about it. All these scholars are saying this. Now, so Ibn Kathir is a weak hadith. Ibn Abbas is a weak hadith. They're all weak. Weak hadith are authoritative, reliable hadith, according to the scholars from Al-Azhar and Al-Madinah universities. So thanks for your ignorance or lies or both. Amen. So anywho, these are all stories about Muhammad's mom. Really, Muhammad is the light of Allah. Muhammad is the first creation of Allah, and his light adorns the throne, and his light shone out through his mom, and whatever. So that is what they claim, and his light was so bright, blah blah blah. But this thing is not an isolated example. Just about every single Sira, and as I said, you can find dozens online if you try. You'll find 4 dozen easy. All talk about this story. Sorry, Thaddeus, was that the answer to the question, or shall I?
Well, he's leaving tons and tons of laughy emojis. Because
he's getting.
You didn't tell him what source it was.
I just told him he can find this in Ibn
Kathir.
He can find it in Ibn Ishaq. He can find it in Ibn Abbas. These are all in all. Yep. Sorry.
I was gonna say. I guess you told him it was in 12 different sources, but you didn't tell him the name of a single source. So he's just gonna sit there and laugh and say that this in Hadith science we don't consider this an authentic story. Blah 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 blah. Well, first of all, Hadith science is complete nonsense. There's not a historian in the world who says, "Oh, I'm going to decide what's true based on the names that the person attached to the story they made up. You can make names of the transmitters just as easily as the story itself. So that's just silly to begin with. Two, how did Muslims decide who were the unauthentic translators? Oh, they looked at stories they didn't want to believe, and they said those transmitters must be inauthentic. It's completely circular reasoning. And then, Mary, as Lloyd pointed out, the same basic story is found in just about every single Sira manual. So are you saying every single Sira is inauthentic? Every single Sira is spreading lies about Muhammad? Every Muslim who wrote these Siras is going straight to hell? And yet you're relying on them to transmit the Quran to you accurately.
Yeah,
you're relying on them to transmit the Hadith accurately.
How is it that we have an entire genre? Sorry, how is it that we have an entire genre of Islamic literature that is nothing but lies?
Yeah. The same excuse doesn't work anymore when everywhere you turn, these are the same people that you see providing you with these narrations, providing you with these sources. I mean, again, you can say, okay, these aren't reliable, but they don't recognize the implications of that. They have to throw out much more than I think they're willing to.
Yeah, sorry, Thaddeus, I interrupted you. You were saying...
No, that's fine. You know, I mean, it's just saying we consider this unauthentic. Well, great. You consider it inauthentic personally. That's totally irrelevant. You're totally dodging the point.
Show us give us the authoritative references to this, how you form this opinion from your scholars.
Yeah, you know, if these sources are inauthentic, tell us which of the Sira are authentic. If it's none of them, then why are you trusting those same Muslims who are writing these things to transmit you the other materials? And why do you tell us things that only is found in Sira, like Muhammad working miracles, Muhammad giving prophecies? When we ask you for your reasons to believe in Muhammad, you tell us stuff like that. Then we go to those sources and tell you what else they say, and you tell us those sources are inauthentic. Please explain how that works exactly.
Brilliant point, Thaddeus. They tell us the miracles of Muhammad. Where do we find them? In the Sira. Now they tell us the Sira are all false, written by liars who all went to hell for lying about Muhammad. Thanks, Amen. Perfectly said, Thaddeus. So Muhammad's mom went to hell because she says, on the night that I gave birth to him, a light illuminated the palaces of Syria so that I saw them. She had very good eyesight.
Yeah.
You know, because back then, women had excellent eyesight. They could see 1,300 kilometers in a straight line. You know, it was different time. It was different, and women were different. You know, they developed faster. Their eyesight developed a whole lot. You know, so the Prophet later confirmed this. He said, my mother saw when she gave birth to me a light that illuminated the palaces of Basra. So now Muhammad's a liar too. So Muhammad went to hell for lying about Muhammad. Or these people are liars. They're major scholars of Islam, are all liars. And they've got, so I've got 36 of these books, and every single one is written by a lying Muslim liar.
Either way, someone's going to hell. That's basically what you're saying. No one's getting out of this. Something's wrong.
Yeah, you can't win, you must lose, and you can't get out of the game, right?
Yeah.
So this event is also a very clear indication of the spiritual rank of the Lady Amina. To see the places of Basra and Syria from Mecca demands spiritual vision of sanctity.
Yeah.
Later, the Prophet's uncle, Ibn Abbas, praised him with a poem, blah, blah, blah. When you were born, the earth was lit and your light, so was the sky. So his uncle went to hell too. So his witness, when she first saw him, laid a hand on him and smiled. When he smiled, a light appeared from his mouth that rose to the sky. So his witness, Halima, straight to hell for lying about Muhammad.
Oh my goodness.
This is really sad. Muhammad Amin, what do you say about that? And this is written by Muhammad Amin? No, by Dr. Mustafa Badawi on masood.co.uk, one of the largest Islamic sites in the UK. So they're lying to what, 3-4 million Muslims? This is really sad. Amin, jump on this. Get a hold of.
I'm looking at the chat right now.
Dude, you need to get hold of Islam QA and tell them, and get hold of somebody. And this man is spreading lies about Muhammad, and he is publicly putting this out there, and he's preaching this stuff. Do something.
He's
Save
gonna
your
have
religion from this.
he's gonna have a hard time though when they ask him who he is, and then they realize he has no credibility compared to.
He's going to say,
these
I'm
Islamic
Muhammad
scholars.
Amin from the comments
Yeah.
section. So yeah, I mean, people are believing this, Muhammad. People are believing this. Do something. Okay, moving on. So the Holy Prophet, now Hazrat Abdullah bin Abbas said, now Hazrat it's an honorific in Islam, right? Like Hazrat Aisha, right? It's an honorific for Aisha. The Holy Prophet had no shadow. Muhammad's light caused that he had no shadow. His radiance would eclipse even the bright sun. In front of a lighted lamp, his radiance would be more powerful. I saw a Chinese movie once, it was a martial arts thing, that had a kick with no shadow. But the man with no shadow, that's new to me.
Yeah. Usually, doesn't that mean you're like a vampire or something like that? Like, don't vampires not have shadows?
Look, man, I'm from Africa and I'm getting very confused, because I attended a school for emotionally disturbed teachers.
Yeah.
And it affected me, but this is really starting to damage me now, just reading this stuff.
Detox and read the Bible.
So this is from the ahlsunnatjumat.com, whatever. And I mean, you guys should look at these links and read them. I'm happy to share this stuff. Abu Huraira from Muslim reported that Allah's messenger Muhammad said, the gates of paradise are opened on only 2 days, Monday and Thursday. Did you know that?
No, but I hope that was when he went to heaven on the horse, because otherwise he would have been let out.
So we know it was a Monday or a Thursday.
It's true. That's really interesting. I wonder what they do the rest of the days of the week, if the people are just outside the gates all clamoring to get in, or
admin.
Paperwork.
Well, maybe they're all at Taco Tuesday, and that explains why they're not there Tuesdays. I don't know.
Yeah, then what happens on Wednesdays? I don't know. We're going to have to think up some things. If you guys in the chat could think of activities for the other days, what heaven is doing on every day except Monday and Thursday, that would be great. I just thought I'd throw that in there for fun. So now let's continue. Now, of course, Jesus, as a Jew, had to be circumcised on the 8th day, which is the custom. So Jesus was circumcised. We can find it in Luke 2:21. Of course, Muhammad was born circumcised.
Actually, hold on. Before you go on to the circumcision, we did have a comment about the light. Muhammad Amin says, according to Islam QA, that it's not permissible to say the prophet is from light, which is very interesting because Tatuna pointed out that the Sahih collections, I don't know offhand if it's Bukhari or Muslim or both, probably both, say that when Aisha was looking for a needle she lost in the dark, Muhammad shined his face so that she could see the needle. So that, apparently the Sahih Hadith are impermissible in Islam, and they are all lies as well.
Right. So Bukhari and Muslim are liars and have gone to hell. Thanks for that.
Now they basically have nothing, almost.
Yeah. So now Sahih Muslim is a liar, right? Imam Muslim is a liar. Imam Bukhari is a liar. So you know who we can trust? You know who we can trust as an authority in Islam? Muhammad Amin. We've got that guy. He's in the YouTube comments.
Oh my goodness.
He's someone we can rely on for authoritative commentary on Islam. Fortunately. Yeah. Obviously, none of this makes sense. This is all over the place. Let's have a look at this bit. Right? So now look, also you missed the whole part where Muhammad is the light of Allah, the Nuri Muhammadi, which is not, I'm not making that up. That is all over their Sira. He is the Nuri. It's seriously, read up on it. It's all over the drinking place. So there are different opinions on this matter, right? Mo was born circumcised. So now if you read Islam QA, they say, well, there are different opinions on this matter. Muhammad was born circumcised. Gabriel circumcised him when he split open Muhammad's chest. Remember, I read like half a dozen versions of that story.
Where they pulled out the...
So when he was 4 years old or whatever, the angels cut open his chest, removed his heart, washed it, removed the little black speck from Satan, washed it, put it back, and Bob's your uncle, right? So that miracle, which page in the Quran is it, Muhammad Amin? So that we can confirm that story. Which page in the Quran is it? Page 12, 13, 27? Thaddeus, any thoughts from you?
Well, I guess Edmund clarified his position. He said that it was only a miracle that happened at his birth. It wasn't that he was created from light. Well, I don't recall us saying that he was literally created out of light. I recall us saying that this so-called miracle is quite ridiculous. So, and just a minute ago, he was telling us how this story was inauthentic. Now he's saying it is a miracle that happened at Muhammad's birth. So he can't even make up his own mind. I guess maybe he, after mouthing off about us making stuff up, looked it up and said, oh, wait, this is authentic. Oh, crap. Yeah, it happened. It happened. I believe it.
Yeah, like I said, it's like they just have to try to force the square peg into the circle hole, and it doesn't work.
So Muhammad was born, so Jesus was circumcised, but Mo went one better. He was born circumcised, right? We'll get into all of that. So he was born circumcised, or Gabriel had to circumcise him when he split open Muhammad's chest, right? When he cut him open to remove his heart when he was a child. Or that his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, circumcised him according to Arab custom. So it could be, he could be blue, he could be green, or he could be orange. But it's all the same, really. You could be in Cape Town, you could be in Johannesburg, or you could be in London. It really doesn't matter. It's all the same place, right? So the prophet was born circumcised with his umbilical cord cut. And his mom said he was born clean. There was no impurity on him. He just popped right out, clean and washed, right? Like he'd been through a car wash. And then Aisha, his wife, says, I never, ever saw the private parts of the messenger of Allah. His wife never saw his winky.
Yeah, that raises some questions. Was she always covering her eyes because that's the only way she could get through it? Or
I don't know.
So maybe Muhammad was so embarrassed by his body that he insisted on leaving his clothes open, and he just let down his zipper or something. I don't know.
Or maybe the light was so bright, whenever he took off his clothes, that she couldn't even see anything anyways. Who knows? You're
right. That's probably the light was so bright it blinded her. Now, his son said, the prophet asked me to make sure that no one except me washed him. I believe this is in reference to his death. Okay. Mm-hmm. So his son, unless his son used to bath him at night, what the hell? But Ali, the prophet, asked me to make sure that no one except me washed him. Ali said, Muhammad said, no one has seen me naked without going blind. Muhammad said, no one has seen me naked. This is in a book called the Ashifa of Kadhi Iyad. This is probably the most famous and the most revered of the Sira, the Gospels of Muhammad. This one is probably the most famous, the most respected of all these Sira, as far as I can tell. And this is one in Arabic I don't know about. But so let's see.
Well, before you go on, I actually have a question about that. If no one has seen me naked without going blind, I wonder what happened to his mom and the midwife giving birth to him. Did they go blind?
And his other wives?
The one with clothes on. I don't know.
And doesn't this sound familiar that from think the Bible? No one can see God naked.
Oh, yeah, like Exodus.
No one can see God's light. Right, Exodus?
That's true, yep. No one can see me and live.
So Mo is not just doing a one-up on Jesus. Mo has gone into God mode.
Oh my goodness. He's deity. Wow.
So Kadhi Iyad, who is obviously let's confirm, he's not a real Muslim. B, he's an enemy of Islam. C, he's not a real Muslim. I don't know. You guys help me out here. But so Kadhi, he's citing weak hadith, right? In the most famous of the Sira manuals in the world. In the most famous, most popular one in the world, he just happens to have this written there by accident.
Yeah.
So the prophet was born circumcised. Of course, Abdul Muttalib named him Muhammad, which means he who is praised. And then he shaved the baby's head, and then he circumcised him on the 7th day. That's when the moon split. The second most famous gospel of Muhammad, the second most famous Sira of Muhammad in today's world. So he was born with his umbilical cord cut, and he was born circumcised, except he was circumcised on the 7th day.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. It's almost like these authentic traditions are just making stuff up at random. That can't be it, though. Gotta be something else.
Yeah, what do you know? You're just a YouTuber.
At this point, I feel the need to use words stronger than the word making stuff up. I need stronger words than stuff.
Yeah.
So this is these quotes are from the two most famous, to my knowledge, the two most famous. Of course, the Muslims in the comments, feel free to let me know which are the actual authoritative, most famous, reliable ones, right? Because you guys are honest. You wouldn't lie to me, would you? You know, because you want us to learn about Islam, right? So do share. If I'm missing one, you know, let me know. This is the right one to read from, you know, in case I picked the wrong one. So yeah, excuse my sarcasm, but man, reading through this stuff upsets me. You have no idea how angry this makes me.
Yeah.
So this is contradiction. What do you guys think? So Ali said no one has seen Muhammad naked without going blind. So none of his wives apparently saw him naked, unless they were all blind. And Aisha, his wife, never saw his winky. Explain that.
I get my explanation about the light, and that's the best I can do, because I mean, even in the next source right there where he says, no one has seen me naked without going blind, I mean, that could be why. But at this point, I feel like we're just having to do all the work filling in this in between, because the scholars themselves never considered these contradictory statements.
Yeah, before we move on real quick, someone pointed out a little while ago about how the Hadith talk about how white Muhammad was, about his white armpits and white skin and white belly, and I think it is actually directly related. They were making a bit of a joke about it, but I think it is actually directly related. I think that the Hadith talking about how white Muhammad is exactly the same thing as what the Sira are doing here when they say that he was radiating light and shining bright, and no one could look at him without going blind and whatnot. That they're both saying the same thing, that he, you know, he's radiating this light, and that's why he looked like he was really light-skinned.
Yeah, and of course, Ibn Abbas said, you will meet Allah. So the Prophet said, okay, you will meet Allah barefoot, naked, and uncircumcised, coincidentally, just like Mo. That's in Sahih Bukhari. So just thought we'd mention that, therefore. So Mohammedans are not struck blind by witnessing Allah, whatever. So basically, you can see Allah naked and you will not be struck blind. But if you see a Mo naked, you will be struck blind.
So he tries to put himself over the God of the Bible as well as the God of Islam. He's greater than Allah now at this point.
Yes, he is Allah at this point.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll continue. So then, hopefully, we're starting to paint a picture of just of just how all over the place this stuff is. I mean, I went through like 36 books to put this together. So Anas said, I have not smelled amber, musk, or anything more fragrant than the smell of the messenger of Allah. So Muhammad smelled amazing.
It just seems like they're trying to like create a character now that's just like the greatest man alive, and they're thinking, oh, well, what else can we animate about him? Let's talk about his smell. Let's talk about how bright he is and all these things. It just seems like they're making it up as they go along.
Yeah, I felt a cool sensation, and his hand was scented. It was as if he had taken it from a bag of perfume. No matter whether he had put scent on or not, if he shook a man's hand, the fragrance would remain for the whole day. If the Prophet placed his hand on the head of a child, the child could be recognized among the other children by the fragrance. The Messenger of Allah slept on a rug in the house of Anas and perspired. Anas's mother brought a bottle in which to put his sweat. So Mo asked about this, and then she said, we put it in our perfume. It is the most fragrant of scents. So, yeah. In his great history, Al-Bukhari mentioned that Jabir said, when the Prophet went down a road, anyone who followed him knew that he had passed that way because of his scent. And Ishaq ibn Rahiwa mentioned that the Prophet's fragrance occurred without the use of perfume. And the Prophet, so blah, 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 let me ride behind him. So I put my mouth. So Muhammad had a mole growing between his shoulder blades, right, which was his seal of prophethood. Let me ride behind him. So I put my mouth on the seal of prophethood, and it spread over me like musk. And that's in the Ashifa, pages 32 and 33. If you go to balaga.net, Shifa, you can read about it, or you can download it on archive.org. This is the most famous of the Gospels of Muhammad. And this is what some of the little wonderful things. Your thoughts?
Well, Tatuna had a good thought here. It's going back to the light, but the chat's a little behind. And it said, if he was really shining like that in the dark, I would believe that the pagans and Jews, etc., would have converted very fast and believe in him. I wonder why they did not. And that's a very good question. Lloyd and I were talking to someone earlier, and he was bragging how 3 whole Christians converted to Islam. But if Muhammad was really going around radiating light everywhere, shouldn't there have been like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of converts?
He's a walking miracle, yeah.
Yeah. So, why aren't we hearing more about these stories of this miraculous man from the 7th century who smelled amazing? Right.
And then, Diane pointed out that Muhammad smelled this way, even though he never took a bath between visiting his various wives.
Oh, yeah. He probably didn't need to then. Oh, my goodness.
So yeah, the things that they I'm going to go through this at some length. I mean, this won't be done in 2 episodes, obviously, but they really place Muhammad on a serious pedestal. For instance, when the Holy Prophet relieved himself, the earth would swallow his poop, his poopies. That spot would be fragrant like musk. So his poop didn't stink. His poop smelled sweet. As given in the Hadith, it has been narrated on the authority of Hadrat Aisha, his wife, and I hope she wasn't lying. O Prophet of Allah, I have seen that you go to relieve yourself, and the person who goes after you does not find anything there, the Prophet said. Aisha, Allah has commanded the earth to swallow the feces of the prophets. And that's in the Kanz al-Ummal, right? Another famous Hadith collection. Now, I don't know when in the Bible the prophets had their poopies swallowed by the earth and it released sweet fragrance, but your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess that's one of the parts that got corrupted and left out of the Bible or something.
Oh man, that's terrible.
Must have, yeah.
We missed out. I mean, what about Jesus? What because think about it, Mo probably pooped twice a day. So this is the most prolific miracle of all time.
Yeah. I mean, I hope there's just opening little small holes, because if all it was moving the earth every time Muhammad took a crap, there might have been a lot of earthquakes going on in that region.
Maybe we're still dealing with the aftershocks now in 2020.
So let's look at the Ashifa. There's a Imam Ayaz hadith. Whenever the Holy Prophet relieved himself, the earth would swallow up his feces and only fragrance would be left at that spot. Now, let's go on. This is from the Maqasid ul-Islam. This is from one of the finest scholars of Islam, right? And he says, now tell me, is there anyone who claims that his body gives fragrance? Finding this out is easy. Whoever makes such a claim should be made to wear woolen clothes in summer and should be seated in the sun. Then a stranger should be asked to sit beside him. If that stranger does not run away muttering under his breath, then we will talk. This will show that the stink was of that person's body only. Can the claim that such stinking bodies are equivalent to the fragrant feces be acceptable? Never. This is the grandeur of Muhammad's feces, and he capitalizes his, right? That they are 1,000 times better than the bodies of others.
Wow. It's incredible that we're even talking about this, and yet here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading this stuff, and I'm like, I'm in shock when I read this stuff. I'm like, good grief. I spent like a weekend reading this. It's insane. So Muhammad split the moon in 2 with one wave of his hand. The hadith of the splitting of the moon is present in Sahih Bukhari and a bunch of others, right? The people of Mecca requested the Prophet show them a sign of his prophethood. Now, of course, when we opened the previous show, Muhammad says, no miracles, not going to happen, right? But the Holy Prophet split the moon for them. In the time of the Holy Prophet, the moon was split into 2. One piece was over the mountain, the other was in the valley of the mountain. This is in a book called The Matchless Prophet. Now, it's in multiple books. There's not just one, it's in dozens of them. So here you've got this story, and of course, there's no evidence of this, right? There's no evidence. In fact, in other stories, which we'll get to, Muhammad grabs a few trees by the branches and they walk behind him like a herd of sheep, right? Wow. The trees literally walk behind him and cover him when he goes to do his toilet. And so these stories are common. These are not isolated mistakes. This is everywhere you look. This is the common understanding of Mo. Sorry, yeah? That is.
I was going to say, sorry, I have to read this comment. It's just too funny. Ihaka Hartley says the moon split because Muhammad took a dump there.
Oh my goodness. So he made a pit stop on his travel to heaven on the horse.
Yeah, I guess so.
Oh my God. Oh God, oh God. People still, yeah. And of course, Amin's, you're only reading the unauthentic. Sorry, I didn't write these books. Okay, go talk to your scholars, dude. This is what Muslims believe. You believe this stuff. So, yeah, it's in Bukhari, right? So, I mean, so there was something from this that, okay, so short version, Muhammad was purified. His body was made perfect, okay? Because his chest was split open, his heart was removed, he was cleaned, he had pure descent from the best among Arabs, right? He had the finest in lineage and upbringing. His intelligence and patience were greater than any of the creation of Allah. This is in the Kitab Ashifa, right? The antidote in knowing the rights of the chosen prophet, right? His compassion, his mercy, blah, blah, blah. All of his sins were forgiven. So therefore, he did not sin because Allah forgave every one of his sins, all his sins early and late, as they state. However, of course, anything Muhammad did is right. So therefore, if Muhammad raped a 9-year-old girl, that was right. It's not a sin. It's not an error. It's not a mistake. It's right. If Muhammad tortured people for money, that's right. So why would he need anything forgiven if what he does is perfect?
That's a great point.
So yeah, so they go on about this, the protection of the Quran. I'll skip over this. I mean, but they speak about the wonders of the clear Quran, that no one can make a mistake. But notice they do speak of, you've got the miraculous splitting of the moon and the delaying of the setting of the sun. So Muhammad apparently delayed the sunset. I recall that in the Bible somewhere.
Yeah, it's strange that somehow all these Bible stories are applied to Muhammad.
Yeah.
Muhammad. And of course, we have the miracle, right, of the tree that spoke. Sorry, this is from in Balagha.net, the miracles of the prophet, his characteristics, on Balagha.net, one of the biggest Islamic sites, right? So you've got the miracle of the tree that spoke. It answers the prophet's call. So this apparently, now, which page in the Quran is this, Amin? Can you let us know? Oh, because you are a sick brood of vipers. Oh, now the words of Jesus. That is amazing. Come to Jesus. So the miracle of the palm trunk that wailed at its separation from the prophet. I mean, this guy's lying about Mo and lying about Islam. Do something. It's balagha.net, okay? The miraculous revival of the dead. So Muhammad's miraculous revival of the dead and their speech. Remember the boy who revived and spoke, the dead boy that woke up and spoke to Muhammad and said, I recognize your prophethood. And babies and suckling infants that spoke and bore witness to Muhammad's prophethood. These are miracles of Muhammad. These are all in the Sira. All of the Sira that Amin and all the others tell us are fake, lies. When they say unauthentic, they mean lies. They mean complete and utter lies, right? Just call it what it is. Now, of course, we have to believe this, but so where do we stand with this? The miraculous healing of the sick, we'll get to that. The miraculous healing, how Muhammad spat in someone's eyes and healed their sight using spit. I wonder where did that come from?
Yeah, good question.
So plagiaristic.
The miraculous healing of the sick and the incurable, and of course the miracles and blessings, the things that were transformed through Muhammad's touch. So of course, I'll pause here for a moment. The Kaaba was the first house of worship built for mankind. It is literally the oldest house of worship on the face of the earth. It was built by Adam and later rebuilt by the prophets Abraham and Ismail. And this is from When the Moon Split, a biography of Prophet Muhammad. This is probably like the second most popular biography of Mo. I'll pause there. I mean, we've probably got around 10 minutes to go or so, but they literally make this claim. The Kaaba is the first house of worship ever built. I don't think there's any evidence for that. Love to see it. If Amin and Dida can give us that.
So Amin's all over the place. One comment he'll say, this is authentic, and then the next he'll say, this is not authentic, and then he'll say, this is authentic again. I guess he's just going story by story and saying some of these are true and some of them aren't. But I mean, if even one of them is supposedly true, then the embarrassment is there. So I don't know why he's wasting his time telling us some of them are authentic and some of them aren't. But I did want to say something about that miracle of the tree speaking, because one thing we see in comments a lot is Muslims come in and say, the Bible makes no sense whatsoever. It's totally ridiculous. In what place a donkey speaks? Well, which one is harder to speak, a donkey or a tree?
What about the ants that speak in the Quran?
Oh man.
Exactly. And they not only speak to each other, these tiny little tight microscopic creatures, they speak so loudly that Solomon can hear them in his own language.
Yeah, the ants that spoke whatever the heck Solomon spoke. That's really crazy. So now remember, the Quran says that he will never show them a miracle. And yet, apparently, the people of Mecca asked the Prophet to show them a miracle, so he split the moon. Okay, that's in Bukhari. So Bukhari says Muhammad definitely split the moon. So unless Bukhari is a liar now, I mean, is Bukhari a liar? And you say the scholars, can you give us a reference to the page, the book, where that reference comes from that you're claiming? The splitting of the moon in Bukhari. The moon was split into two pieces, Bukhari. The moon was cleft asunder into two parts, Bukhari. The moon was split into two, Sahih Muslim. The moon was split, Bukhari. So now we know the moon was literally split into two.
So but before we go on, Muhammad Amin is saying over and over again, ants speak. And of course, because this is one of those so-called scientific miracles of the Quran. It's an excellent example of how it's done, actually, because in context, it's quite clear that the ants are speaking such that Solomon hears and gains some advantage from it. So he obviously understands them. And he's like, but the Quran knows that ants speak, meaning that they communicate with each other, as if any person couldn't just observe ants' behavior and determine they communicate with each other. Somehow it takes a miraculous knowledge to know that ants communicate with each other, even though that's not what the verse says at all. So it's not miraculous, even if it is what the verse says, and it's not what the verse says. And that is how you get a scientific miracle out of the Quran. So thank you.
Muhammad Amin said, do you want me to prove to you that the splitting of the moon is a miracle? I don't know if we should take him up on that.
It was the two pieces, Amin.
Well, if it happened, if the splitting of the moon happened, I would agree that's definitely a miracle. So if you have some evidence that doesn't entail assuming Islamic sources are true, then we'd love to hear that. There was people living all around the earth at this time. The vast majority of societies had writing. Roughly half of the people on the earth, it would have been nighttime when the moon was split, so they should have observed it. And ancient people were, in general, very interested in the sky, so they often had people watching the sky all night long because they thought that they could get signs from heaven. So it'd be extremely likely that someone would write this down if it happened. So I would like to hear what non-Islamic source recorded the splitting of the moon.
He can do that. So we have Sahih. So then we have Sahih reports of the Prophet healing the eyes of Ali ibn Abi Talib and curing the leg of Salama during the Battle of Khaybar. And these are enough for us, and we are not in need of weak reports to prove miracles of the Prophet. And this is from the book Famous but Unauthentic, in other words, famous but lying false stories from the Sira of the Prophet Muhammad. I referenced that in the previous show, where this told us that Khadija was not 40 years old, that they don't know how old she was. She was anything from 25 to 46. They don't know her age. And in fact, they say she was probably 25 since she had 6 kids.
Wow.
So this tells us, and in fact, it tells us that that story of her being 40 is literally a rejected hadith, not even a weak hadith, rejected. In other words, false, right? So now they state here that they have Sahih reports that he did healing. Where's this in the Quran? Because, I don't see it. Someone informed Muhammad that he was suffering from eye trouble. So he ordered them to bring Ali in front of him. The Prophet spat in his eyes, and his eyes were cured immediately, as if he never had any eye trouble. So Muhammad healed someone of blindness by spitting in their eye. Sounds familiar somehow. Anyone know about that?
Yeah, I think Jesus did something very similar.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because in the miracle of healing the guy with the mud and the spit, Jesus does it twice before he's healed. But apparently Muhammad only had to do it once, so it's
No,
an extra
Mo did
special.
it twice too. No. And I mean, non-Islamic scholars say that hadiths is historically reliable.
Sure they do.
goodness.
Yeah,
Because Muslims tell us that hadiths are unreliable. So I saw the trace of a wound in Salama's leg. I went to the Prophet. He puffed his saliva in it, the wound, thrice. And since then, I've not had any pain. And again, I went to the Prophet. He puffed saliva into the wound, and I've not had any pain. That's in Bukhari, twice. So apparently Muhammad healed people. He had miraculous healing powers, according to Bukhari. But in the Quran, they say Muhammad did no miracles. So who's lying here?
it's a good question.
So, I mean, my question to the comment section is, I mean, how do you utilize this to stick a spanner in the works of these stories? I mean, this stuff's all over the place. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of these things, Ayo? I mean, ever come across any of this stuff?
So as I've said before, I've heard the cross references in the hadiths and the Quran, etc. But these things coming from the tafsir and the Sharia, I've not, and it's insane to see how. I mean, because I knew that people had talked about how Muhammad had been deified, but to hear about some of these things in detail, like 170,000 years and all the souls praising him and the light all the way to Syria lighting up the castles. I mean, it really. To me, it really sounds like they were trying to create a character in some type of fictional movie that's supposed to just be like the most amazing character. And they just kept trying to think of all these things that could come up about him. Oh, let's make his scent really amazing. And it's almost like I can imagine them all in like a big room just laughing about the stuff they come up. Like the stuff they come up with, like, oh, why don't we say next that when he poops, the earth opens up and swallows up his poop and that it smells so great. And they're all just like, oh, that's great. Write that down. And then the next thing, oh, the trees follow him and he herds them. Like, and it just sounds like they were all in some big boardroom coming up with things to make up about him to basically emulate him as like the perfect prophet. And yet in the process, they didn't recognize that people would actually believe this. But when you look at the inconsistencies, I mean, it's so easy to see that it's not legitimate. I mean, even there's a comment here, which I like. It says to Muhammad Amin, it says, we'll be praying for you if you want the truth. God draws near to those who are humble. It's not a sin to have been deceived, but it's the spirit of stupid to stay deceived when it's obvious. So Muhammad Amin, and to anyone else who's watching that believes this, I mean, you got to be intellectually honest with yourself, because the price tag intellectually of trying to hold on to this, despite what we've presented here, both today and at the previous sessions, it's a major one.
Yeah.
So, again, if you're honest with yourself, you got to know that there's something amiss here. I mean, that's really my prayer for these Muslims watching.
Nice. Yeah, I just thought, since they talk about us so often in disparaging terms, it is proven from this hadith, in casual and crucial circumstances, a person offering prayer may spit in the mosque.
And yet they were talking about us like peeing and praying and all this stuff, and there they go.
But not in normal circumstances. So in casual and crucial you can spit in the mosque, but not in normal circumstances. What the hell does that even mean?
Yeah.
Okay. But of course it says right here in number 572, to spit in the masjid is a sin. But go ahead and do it anyway. It's okay.
It kind of reminds me of the laws that say don't murder the kafir, but then the other ones say, but if you do, there's no penalty for it.
No penalty. So yeah. So, being spitting in the mosque, in the prayer, do not spit on your right, but behind you or towards your left or under your foot. So don't spit in the mosque. It's a sin unless you spit to your left or under your foot. That's Jamia Tirmidhi, volume 2, hadith number 572 and 571. I mean, just amazing stuff. Go ahead and spit. We don't like spitting in the mosque, but you know what? It's fine. Don't do it, but it's okay if you do it. That's great. Have you guys ever spat in church? Name me one person you've ever met that has spat in church. Whoever
Never.
would even dream of it.
Nope.
That's disgusting.
Actually, I want to point out something else about this. That it tells you which direction to spit, spit under your foot. And we see this over and over and over again in the Hadith. I feel like, 10% of the Hadith are telling you which direction to do something, how many times to do something, and so on. And it all sounds a lot like mysticism, like pagan rituals. They how you get to heaven, how you do how you achieve favor with God is the magic formulas and you follow the magic formulas. And that's like a very extremely pagan idea here in this pure
Now, when we
monotheism.
go through the Sharia of Islam's top scholars, you start to discover that maybe, just maybe, they go down that road, Thaddeus.
Yeah, maybe.
You understand it in a realm that you wouldn't just get from looking at the Quran and the Hadiths.
Correct. The Quran, dude, look, I've said this, and I guess, look, let me throw this out as an idea, as a thought experiment. Let's just say the Quran is entirely irrelevant. If all Qurans on the planet disappeared right now, the Islamic scholars wouldn't notice, nor would they care. I guarantee you, they would neither notice nor would they care. What they care about are their commentaries.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The major source of authority in Islam is not the Quran. Yes, certainly everything derived originally from that, but the body of literature that developed from it ultimately led to what's called the ijma, the consensus, and the consensus of the scholars, the opinions of the scholars. So Islam is not what Muhammad said, it's what the scholars say Muhammad said. It's not what the Quran says, it's what the scholars say the Quran said. The ijma, the consensus, the agreement of the scholars is the major source of legislation and consensus within Islam. And it's not Muhammad Amin. I'll assure you that he's got no role to play in this.
So do you guys want to wrap it up, or?
I guess, we can always do another. We're going to have to. I am currently just about 40% of the way through. 40. And
that alone should be enough for any Muslim, honestly, to, oh my goodness.
Yeah, we had a lot of interaction from the chat today, so we went through less material than planned, but that's good. The interaction from the chat is good because honestly, I really appreciate it when the Muslims come in here and try to interact with us, because what we usually get is people who don't watch any of the video. They come into chat and then they leave a comment that betrays the fact they didn't watch any of it, because they try to guess the content and say, when you said blah, blah, you were just lying. And it's like, oh, I didn't say that in the video. You just guessed that from the title. I could have said that and it would have still been true, but I didn't actually say it in this particular video. So they take, they try to guess which common criticism you're using instead of actually watching the video. So I super appreciate it when people interact in the comments, because, it gives us a chance to defend our position, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, I just find it depressing. How can anyone believe this?
Yeah, really. Oh my goodness. It's just insane to me, the inconsistencies, the contradictions. It's out of control. But hopefully as we keep talking about this, they'll, be intellectually honest enough with themselves to at least recognize that somebody's lying and that something's not adding up and that they should look into this.
You know what upsets them? For instance, I get into epic discussions, as Thaddeus will know, on YouTube in the comment section. What annoys them is when they say, well, in the Gospels, I'll say, but that's a weak narration. Why are you using that? And they say, but Paul was a sectarian. Why? He's not relevant. He was a sectarian. Why are we even talking about him? Right? And they'll, but that's a weak narration. What's relevant about? Seriously, it drives them batty, because then it's in their face how they lie, because it's obvious I'm not being serious. I'm being sarcastic, right?
Yeah.
But then their story just is exposed, and it drives them nuts. Just use those excuses. Just say the same things they do.
Yeah. Shoes on the other foot.
Yeah, because also What religion lies about its scholarly works, its scriptures, its leaders, its God, its prophet, to defend it, and calls them all false, calls them lies, calls them fake, disowns them, disavows them to prove their authenticity?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I said something along these lines to Lloyd either today or yesterday when
Yeah,
we were talking about our conversation. I said, Islam is the religion that's 100% true, but based on 100% false sources. That is the greatest miracle of them all.
Yeah.
Everything in
Hey,
Islam is
that's a good
false,
point.
but Islam is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty, guys. Well, great discussion, and yeah.
Muhammad Amin and his weak hadiths, we discussed last week. Weak hadiths are 100% authentic, authoritative, and cited in the Sharia that Muhammad Amin follows as a good Muslim. If he tells you otherwise, he's lying. And we know you're a liar, Amin, right? We were well aware of that. So weak hadiths are sourced as entirely authentic and entirely reliable. We discussed this last week. I quoted from Al-Azhar and Medina University. So speak to your scholars. Stop lying to us. You're not lying to us. You're lying to yourself. We know this already.
Yeah, it's an internal issue, not an external one.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, the Sira material isn't just something that was written in the 10th century or 12th century or whatever date of the specific work and was forgotten about. People are still writing biographies of Muhammad today, and they use the exact same material.
Correct.
Each one picks and chooses a little bit, but they all say basically the same thing. They all talk about how amazingly fragrant he was. They all talk about how he was the perfect example for all humanity. They all talk about how he was not too tall or too short, or how he was not too fat or too thin. They all try to make him perfect in every possible way. And they
Except
all
Surah
talk.
shows us Muhammad is fat. In fact, he's called in Bukhari a fat dwarf.
Well, that's one of those inauthentic hadiths in the Sahih collection of Bukhari. But as I was saying, and they all talk about how he worked miracles. They all talk about how he split the moon. They talk about how water shot out of his fingertips. We didn't get to that one today. They talk about how he healed the sick, how he fed the many people with a single lamb, and so forth. So either these sources are considered authentic by Islam and were correct, or the prominent Muslim scholars of today continue to lie about what Islam teaches. So either your leaders are lying or you're lying to yourself. You let us know which one. If you want to say every person in Islam is a liar, that's fine by me. I mean, you don't have to convince us that these things are lies. We agree. Every single source we quoted today is fake. Every single source we quoted was made up 200 or more years after Muhammad died. It had nothing to do with the historical Muhammad. We agree with that. You don't have to convince us. But here's the problem. If you don't have these sources, you don't have anything. You're following a religion with no sources. So if the sources we come to you with are fake, if they're made up, then Islam is fake and made up. And that's our position already. You don't have to convince us. So either accept these sources and be consistent and accept all of what they say and not just pick and choose, or reject them and try to convince the Muslims that are teaching them to reject these sources. There was a news story this past week about how a group of Saudi scholars want someone to rewrite the Quran to remove all the mistakes in it.
I saw that,
If that's what you want to do, if you want to rewrite all your sources to not have mistakes, by all means, go right ahead. But don't tell us they're fake. We agree. So any closing thoughts from you guys?
No, I think you ended it on a perfect note, because that really is, it's really a new variant of the Islamic dilemma in a way, where they're backed into a corner intellectually, and either one requires a huge price tag where you either affirm Muhammad is God or you leave Islam. And Muslims don't want to do either. And yet those are when you look at the the Sharia and the Tafsir and all these other sources, and the reliability of the scholars, that unfortunately are the only two options that they're left with. And so the ball is now in their court. Now they'll try to ignore this and brush it aside, but eventually, as more and more people talk about it, and that is the goal, it will be something that not just them, but the entire Muslim world will have to address. And I think when that happens, you'll see a lot of Muslims on their way out from Islam, which is my prayer. So
we have them and we follow them, but we have to check everything, its authenticity. Dude, you're not a scholar. You're an idiot, right? This is from your scholars. So cite us from scholars, cite us from the Sharia, or just you're wasting our time because you're lying to us and you're lying to yourself. Tituin asked, I've always been Christian. Yeah, my family has always been involved in the church. So I've since I was very young, always been involved in the church in some way or another. My uncle's a bishop. I've had several priests in my family.
Before we log off, Tituin asked me to address JW. I'm just going to read his comment. It says, I'm not sure if Jesus is God, and I'm not sure if the Bible is authentic. That's why I'm confused. Muslims say Jesus never knew the Bible, and then he adds, in the Quran. Sounds so heart-touching, although I can't understand it. Well, let me address that second point first, because that one's really easy. We don't determine what is true or not by how beautiful the speech is. So, just because someone is very skilled and can recite the Quran in a very beautiful sounding way doesn't make it true. So I would just totally ignore that point. That's a total false way to look. As far as whether or not knowing Jesus is God and whether the Bible is authentic, I say do the research. The Muslims will say, no, don't research anything, just believe what we tell you. I will not say that. I believe the truth is on my side. I believe that any genuine look at the historical sources will show that the Bible to be historically reliable using the ordinary techniques of history. Now, if you come in with the presupposition that it's false, you're going to find ways to make it false. If you come in with the presupposition to say that it's true, you're going to find ways to make it true regardless. I'm saying come in with no presupposition. Come in and say, how much of this can I verify from other external historical sources? Now, you're not going to verify everything. There's not a single historical source, secular historical source, that 100% of it can be verified from other things. But if you find that the vast majority of what you read can be verified, you can accept the rest as also true. And if it is historically reliable, that means that Jesus actually did claim to be God. And if Jesus claimed to be God, he is either lying or telling the truth. And if he is lying, then why did he raise from the dead? He raised from the dead to prove that he was who he said he was. So that would be my suggestion. Any thoughts you guys want to add to that?
Dude, you said it perfectly. No, that was great. That was really good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. Look for some announcements about upcoming things. I don't have a specific time for anything at this point, but I do have a number of things in the works. We'll have a live stream on abortion, looking at what science and scripture say about that. I will have my usual Saturday Bible study on the Reasoned Worship channel. I'm also in communication with a prominent critic of Islam to come onto my channel. He has agreed, but I don't want to make an announcement until I have the details worked out, because I don't want to, because it may take some time. He's very busy. So I don't want people being like, oh, you said so-and-so is going to be on, and then he's not on for a long while. But yep, we have a lot coming up, and we'll definitely have another live stream on the deification of Muhammad very soon. So just look out for the announcements. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, whether that is just beginning or coming to an end, depending on what part of the world you are.